Hello, everybody, and welcome to Chapter Select, a seasonal retrospective podcast where we bounce back and forth between a series exploring its evolution, design, and legacy. For this season, we are covering the Pokemon franchise. My name is Max Roberts, and I am joined, as always, by Logan Moore. Hi, Logan.
Max, this is the most philosophical Pokemon game ever.
Truths, ideals, hopes, dreams, discoveries, all of the things that a philosopher needs to think and ponder about while adventuring.
Is that what it says in the opening?
Pokemon. The video.
Is that what it says in the little opening video there? Yeah,
hopes,
I couldn't remember.
Dreams, discoveries. As the first note I took.
It definitely has a much different... This game, as Black and White, have a much different vibe in some sense compared to a lot of the other Pokemon games.
It is a totally different vibe.
Which I like, personally, quite a bit. And we'll talk about it. But these definitely stand out within the larger series in more ways than one, for sure. So,
Logan, there are plenty of discoveries for people to make with all of our member specials that we have been making for Super Chapter Select. For just $2.50 a month or $20 a year, you could sign up and get access to our longer episodes. On this one, we talked about the recently announced Last of Us Part 2 remastered and all the implications surrounding that and Naughty Dog. We've got longer episodes, member specials, exclusive episodes that talk about different things, and then bonus videos. Like in Season 6 here, we've been doing all of our Pokemon battles in every single game. And I think, we haven't recorded this one yet, but we might be doing Black and White in person. Which we only did for Heart Gold, Soul Silver. If you remember.
We did it for Fire Red and Leaf Green as well.
Fire Red and Leaf Green because you were here in Florida. So
yes,
there's plenty of stuff to check out. You could go over to listeningwithsuperpower.com, find out more, and sign up. But just check out Super Chapter Select.
Yeah, I would like to do both of our battles in person. So hopefully both this and Black and White too.
It saves us from having to fumble with fan servers.
I was going to say setting up fan servers for all of this, which I'm sure would...
It's not that tricky. You just have to adjust your 3DS's internet settings, pointing it to a specific DNS server or something. It's not too typical, but anyway.
It is another hoop to jump through.
Yeah, it'd just be easier when we're together.
We could use the power of infrared technology. If we were just in person to do this, which I did use that on these. I like how streamlined that trading and battling was on these games. So that's nice. Max, let's do the rundown, and then we'll get into... I have a lot I want to talk about with this game, and I think you do as well. And we've already been kind of talking about it before this episode, but there's still a lot that I want to dive in. So let's do the rundown here. Pokemon Black and White, Max. Did you know they were developed by Game Freak? Of all studios.
I didn't know that.
They released on the Nintendo DS. These were the second installments on the DS behind Diamond and Pearl.
Second new
generation games. They released on March 6, 2011. The game was directed once again by Junichi Masuda. The producers on the game were Junichi Masuda, Hitoshi Yamagami, Shusaku Igami, and Hiroaki Tsuru. The music was then done by Shota Kagayami, Go Ichinose, Hitomi Sato, Junichi Masuda, and Minako Adachi. The Metacritic score on these games, Max, was an 87 out of 100, which is, I feel like, pretty in line with a lot of the others that we have seen across this season.
It's directly tied with X and Y.
That's
it's tied with X. Y is 88 out of 100.
Okay, I feel like most of the newer Pokemon games that we've done have been right around this mid to high 80s more often than not.
They're kind of sitting there.
Yes, which makes sense for the most part, I suppose.
Yeah.
And then these games, I will say, as far as the user score goes on Metacritic, looking at that, they sit at a 7.9. User scores obviously don't necessarily matter all the time. I will say, as far as Poke fandom goes, though, I feel like these two games are kind of slept on, or people have, at the time, I feel like people viewed them as underwhelming or not outright bad, but just don't think they made a huge impact in the moment, and it hasn't been until a few years later here that I think people have come to respect and appreciate these games a bit more, which I think is also true for me, having gone back and played it now. Because I haven't played this game since 2011, I suppose. 2011, 2012, leading up to when the sequels would have come out.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I haven't played these in a very long time. It's been over a decade. So revisiting them now, I think there is a lot of unique aspects to this game that I like a lot, especially since we have played the full series now over the course of the past, for us, it's been the past 12 to 18 months. But throughout this whole season here on Chapter Select, like, these games stand out greatly, like we were saying before. And I think there is a lot of cool elements of this game that I'm excited to kind of dive in and talk to you about. What did you think broadly? Obviously, you've not played these games before, to my knowledge. So what did you think this first time jumping in?
I had no idea anything about these games. The only things that I knew about these games beforehand was someone called N is pretty dope, was my understanding. Had a cool story there. These games have, quote unquote, the best story in Pokemon. And then I've always heard that these were good or / great games. So and maybe I just didn't hear the discussion around the time in 2011, 2012 when these were coming out. You know, these two games, the sequels, back to back. I don't remember hearing anything like meh about it.
I don't think these games were ever outright hated necessarily, but I feel like they are the most slept on entries in the series, if that makes any sense, because they were, as I mentioned before, kind of the second generation DS games that came out. So there's really a lot of the games that I think people look back on the most, that they have the most fondness for, are the newest installments on new platforms. You know, the first GBA game, the first game on DS, the first games on 3DS, the first games on Switch. Like, I feel like those are the ones people look back on the most. So when you release a successive game on a platform, I feel like those are the ones that end up being kind of more forgotten. I think this is true for Sun and Moon as well. I don't feel like people talk about those games half as much as they do with like X and Y and stuff like that.
You have to think about when these games came out, though, which in North America, at least, you know, Black and White launched, as we said, on March 6th of 2011. The Nintendo 3DS launched in North America, in Japan, or let's see, in North America, it was March 27th of 2011. So this was coming out the same time as the 3DS. And
right there with Steel Diver.
Yes, and that also means that Black and White 2 came out a year into the 3DS's life cycle, essentially. Mm-hmm. Not even really, 15 months after the launch of the 3DS. So people probably were, now you could play your DS games on your 3DS, but I think there was a shift and people were waiting for that next big Pokemon game, which would go on to be X and Y. Mm-hmm. And so I think that probably lends a little bit to it. Like, it was truly the crossover tail end of the DS's lifespan, and that could have led to it. I think that also leads to a little bit of why these games are so stinking expensive. Not that they didn't sell well, but they were the end of a console's life cycle.
Yes. Yeah, I think that, I mean, all the games that don't have remakes tend to be pretty expensive too. Like, Gold and Silver, pretty expensive. But yes, these are it explains specifically why Black and White 2 are even more expensive. Because those came out, obviously, you're talking about how this launched the month of the 3DS. Those came out over a year later. So the 3DS had been kind of entrenched on the market at that point for quite a period of time. So for you coming into this, what stands out to you the most about this game? What do you want to start talking about the most? Because obviously there's a lot of things we could talk about, whether it be the Pokédex or the story or like, I don't know. There's a lot of, in many ways, this is a conventional Pokemon game, you know?
Yeah.
There's an evil team. There's Team Plasma. There's a legendary Pokemon. There's all the 8 gyms, and you got to go fight and become the champion. But they do add some new wrinkles here and there. Obviously, a lot of the stuff towards the end of the game with how the champion and the Elite Four are set up, which I assume we will talk about There are some unique little differences here and there, but what stood out to you the most, and maybe what did you like and dislike, if anything, about this game?
So we've talked a little bit before the show in general just about some of my beef with this game in certain aspects. But I think some of the stuff that stood out the most to me just from the game itself is Team Plasma and their whole design. They're very like old
medieval
knights and mages, medieval. I got Final Fantasy 3 vibes from it, or Final Fantasy 6. The cartridge says 3, so I've always called it 3, but it is technically
the
6.
one with Kefka.
The one with Kefka. Yeah. I got vibes from that, especially from, how do you say his name? Gedis?
I think it's Getsis.
Gedis. Very Final Fantasy 3 vibes from him. So I thought that was kind of cool. And I'm sure we'll talk about Plasma more deep, but I noticed a lot there. And then my other thing with this game, and this is a personal thing, you were always talking about leading up to these episodes. It was like these games were 150 something new Pokemon. There were no original Pokemon. This is an entirely new dex. And for me, we have something that I've always called the Wind Waker problem. This is a very Max problem, but I call it the Wind Waker problem after Zelda. And so the first real 3D Zelda that I played was Wind Waker. And I love that game. It's great. But then afterward, at some point, I was like, man, I want to try this Ocarina of Time game. And so I emulated it on my computer at the time. And I remember getting to the first chest. And Link, tumbles in there and pulls out and it plays the chime. Then do. I'm like, oh, that's just like from Wind Waker. Mm-hmm. And then immediately it dawns on me and goes, oh, no, wait. It's the other way around.
Yeah.
And so for me, playing Black, I recognized almost all of these Pokemon. So none of them were new, like really new to me.
And we're playing this. These are the final games we're playing. Obviously, both of the Unova games are back to back here to close out our season. So
yes,
we have seen all of these Pokemon before. Yes.
And so that's not a negative on the game, but that is something that I think is lost. If you don't truly play these games in chronological order, or you weren't there at the time in 2011, like. The concept of an entirely new base dex hasn't happened since these games.
Yes.
And I think it's unfortunate that is lost in time, I think. And then that reflects onto me. It was like, well, I know what a Scrafty is, or the electric zebra. Like I've seen these before,
Yeah.
So there wasn't like this rush of new to see and play with necessarily, besides like the starters, because I just hadn't used them before, or the legendaries. I think that's an interesting thing that's kind of a bummer to miss out on, just because we're 12 years removed.
Well, I think even you can still appreciate, though, just like everything after this, X and Y onward, they've been doing this thing where they don't do full dexes of new Pokemon, but then that's really when they started indexing heavily into here's an alternate form, here's Galarian this, and here's Hisuian this, and like they start doing different forms of old Pokemon, which is fine, and it's not the worst thing ever. But these games, this is the thing I really did want to talk about, is I think top to bottom, other than the original Kanto Pokédex, because nostalgia. Also, I just think that dex is really good, the Kanto dex. But I think this is my favorite dex in all of Pokemon. I think this has the most variety. I think this is the most widely balanced. We've talked throughout the course of this season, like, why does this Pokédex index so heavily into this type? There's way too many water Pokemon in this dex, or there's way too many of one of these types. I feel like the dex in this game is quite balanced, honestly. And it comes before the advent of fairy type, which I appreciate because it's the last pure gen before fairy type got introduced, because I don't really like fairy type that much, because then they start going back and changing old types. Like, oh, what if Meryl was not only a water type, but it was a fairy too? And it's like, oh my gosh, why are we doing this? Like, this is the last kind of pure gen in that manner. And I appreciate that. And this really, like, a lot of my favorite Pokemon ever are in this dex. Like, I really just think it is I love, like, Crocodile. I think he's one of my favorites. I love Haxorus. That's one of my favorite dragon types. Like, just the thing, what's funny though, is I will say this, is that despite how much I love this dex and how varied I think it is, and how well balanced it is, and how much I wish that Game Freak would go back to doing something in this manner where it is just 120 to 150 wholly new Pokemon and that's all you experience, I think the starters are particularly weak in this gen. In fact, I would say these are like bottom tier starters in any of the games, which is funny because typically a lot of the ways that I feel like people view different Pokédexes across Pokemon history is influenced greatly by the starters. And I don't think the starters are that good here.
I actually really struggled with kind of the front decks in general, like those opening 3 gyms, what have you.
I'll agree with that. Yeah.
Like the first, I think 40 to 50 Pokemon are kind of lame in general, and it's not in a very exciting way to build your team. And a part of this also extends from the fact that I've adopted your mentality of like planning out my team ahead of time, and all of the Pokemon that I wanted were mid to late to post game. Like it wasn't a very exciting dex up front to play with, which is kind of a bummer.
I do agree with that. I think that's a problem in a lot of Pokemon games, especially with the sort of the way that I craft my teams and stuff. You know, like I want this and I want to get this too, and like so. But I try to whenever I do that personally, I try to plan it out, like knowing like, okay, well I can't get this one until I get to about the 6th or 7th gym. So until that point, I will use this Pokemon, which I can get a little earlier in the game.
I haven't done that. I haven't like planned a mid team. Like I just try to cover my bases up front. Like for example, Gym 5 is the Sheriff. I think he is ground or rock,
Clay.
One of the two.
Yes.
Clay. And the game gives you basically an opportunity to go get your water duck on the bridge, which is kind of what you need to beat him if you don't have, I guess if you didn't pick, what's the water starter? Oshawott?
Oshawott, yes.
Yeah, if you didn't pick Oshawott, or I guess Snivy. But basically, I picked the Fire Pig and really struggled with Gym 5. My team was not properly handled to like, I was under-leveled by about 5 levels, and I just could not defeat his team, and I had to go catch this duck, which I didn't really want. And then I had to like train the duck up to beat this, and it was this whole that and the
Did you not have any
monkey.
Grass types on your team either?
I had the leaf monkey, but it was too under leveled. It'd get hit and I'd die. So like that's an example of that's the 5th gym in the game, by the way. We're like substantially through the main story. And it just like, but I didn't think, I mean, there's the water toad that you can get in the Pinwheel Forest. But it's just
Tempole.
Yes, which reminds me of the Bellabub in Scarlet and Violet. But instead of groundwater, it's electric water. So I think the early dex is kind of weak.
I do agree with that. Agree with that, generally speaking.
But the stuff later on, very cool.
Yes.
But my other problem that kind of ties in with it, and I know this is what we've talked about before recording the show, is the evolution chain to get a lot of cool Pokemon the leveling is so high to get to some of these Pokemon where they're not evolving until the mid 40s. Some don't even get until the 50. Like you're really pushing to get the 3rd evolution.
There's one Pokemon in the dex that doesn't evolve, I think, until level 65 in its final form.
And to be clear, that is well into the post game.
Yes,
because the Elite Four is basically the upper 40s. So,
and then you can go face them again, and they're in the 70s.
Yeah, and they have a full team and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, there is the leveling structure of this game is designed for the entirety of the game, post-game included. I was thinking about this in our discussion for Heart Gold Soul Silver, the way that they adapted to leveling, because that game's pretty hard if you're not doing these phone call missions where you call people up and train trainers again that have higher experience and stronger teams.
Especially if you're trying to, like, work towards beating red at the end of the game, for sure.
And so they want you to use these systems, the phone call and Heart Gold, to level up. But in this game, it is we want you to play everything, and we're scaling to that. And so I think that's part of, I'll talk about my other problem with the leveling later, but I think that's a part of why I struggled with the leveling pace of this game, because we're getting to the mid to late story and I'm in the upper 30s, low 40s. And I'm just really feeling like a lack of progression in that way, because kind of up until this point, really by the time you're at the Elite Four, in my experience, you're in the mid to late 50s, even the 60s. And so it just feels slow in that way. But the game is designed, we want you to not be in the 60s until you're well into the post game. And for transparency, I didn't have time to really sink into the post game, and I do plan on doing a little bit of it here after we record this, but I looked up kind of what you can do, and like that's where the 3 legendary creatures come in.
Yes.
You can apparently go find the sages from Plasma.
Yes.
Battle the Elite Four again. There is basically half the map to explore. Half the map is post game, which is cool, but given to the nature of how we're playing this, didn't really have the time to like fully flesh that out and explore and just kind of play at my own pace. And so I think kind of not rushing, but we're playing this show.
I was going to say, we have artificial deadlines because, we're trying to come in here and record and talk about the game.
I started playing this game on the 5th of October and I beat it on the 18th of November. So like just over a month. So I kind of had a month of playtime, and that was just to beat the game. But if I was a kid in 2011, I probably would have eaten this up, because it probably feels like, when you're not in this chamber of making a show about it, it probably feels like there's so much game there. And it just builds and builds and builds. And so I think that's a big reason why I was struggling, because the leveling is different than what I'm used to. And I'm playing under this time constraint for a show. And so I'm just getting frustrated with the lack of progression I'm feeling. I do think it's slow. It's a very slow level up. And I don't necessarily care for that, because I don't know, in an RPG, I want to feel like I'm getting stronger, and I just didn't really feel like I was getting stronger. I always kind of felt like I was just under where I needed to be. And that's a little, like, even if you'd go grind, it truly is a grind, because they're handing out like 100, 300 experience points for fights and stuff. It didn't feel like there was a good way to grind if you really were determined. It was just arduous. And I think that, as an adult, I find that frustrating. As a kid, I probably would have eaten it up. So I think it's a tough balancing act, because these games are primarily designed for younger people.
I think, so I agree with you in a general sense. Like, we've played all these games now across this season. Yes, this grind, there is a little bit more of a grind to this. You do level more slowly. And yes, there are some very high levels for some of the Pokemon to evolve. Like, this is the highest level cap of any of the Pokemon games when it comes to evolutions. So those things are all very much true, and what you're saying is not wrong by any means. I will say, though, like, within the scope of the larger series, though, I appreciate these differences more because they are different. Like, we have played so many remakes across this season that are more in line with like how modern Pokemon has been. And to me, modern Pokemon is like X and Y onward, you know, when they start implementing
basically
like,
3D forward.
Yes. When they start implementing, you know, team-wide XP share and stuff like that, which helps alleviate some of the grind problems you've mentioned. So coming back to a game like this is definitely a bit jarring in that manner because we have become so accustomed to how the newer installments have been, but I really, really enjoyed it personally. Like, this is how these Pokemon games used to be. This is how a lot of these, again, not all of them in the sense that like you're leveling more slowly and the level caps of some of the Pokemons are higher to evolve and stuff like that. But just the structure of, you know, how you got to train your team and stuff like that, and how you have to be a little bit more strategic. Like, okay, I have this Pokemon and I want to level it up, and what's the best way I can do that? Okay, I'm going to send it out first and then bring it back, and then I'll send out a stronger Pokemon. And like, those things I enjoy and I kind of miss. Like, there is a grind to it, but there's also something I like about Pokemon grinding. Like, there is a sort of, it makes you feel more personally invested in your team in a way that I don't think the later games have been. Like by the time I got to the end of my team, I felt like I had used all 6 of my Pokemon pretty equally, which is definitely not true in some of the later games.
And for me, I think another problem was a lot of the Pokemon I wanted. Like, my team wasn't really complete until the Elite Four. Like,
Okay.
I was playing with Pokemon I didn't want. So I think that's another element. My team was just like, I don't want this bird duck, you know?
Well, I know they definitely like tuck some Pokemon away off the beaten path in this game too. Like, I know, like, we'll talk about this here in a second, but like HMs aren't really important
HMs aren't a thing at all.
I mean, they are, but like, they are not vital to advance through the main path, which is great. However, they are there if you want to explore a bit more, because I know once you get to, I think it's near Chargestone Cave, or it's near like the 5th or 6th area. Like, once around that time when you get Surf, or maybe you don't get Surf right then, but there's a cave around there that like they mentioned, like, oh, hey, there's a cave over here. If I could just surf over there, then I could access it. And if you come back once you get Surf, you can go into that cave. And that's where some of like the more unique Pokemon are. Like, I know that's where you can get an Axew, which eventually evolves into Haxorus, which is like one of the stronger Pokemon in this gen. Stuff like that. So like, they tuck certain Pokemon away off the beaten path, and I think they try to encourage you to explore a bit more. But yes, they are, like you said before, they are all still a little bit later into the game and stuff like that. But there is like an exploration and a reward to that I think is kind of nice too. And they kind of push you to go into areas that perhaps you wouldn't otherwise. But yes, I do wish some of these Pokemon were front loaded a bit more in the earlier portions of the game. And then there's like some weird little things too that I forgot about, like, for instance, like, I remember when this game was coming out, like, one of the Pokemon that they were really pushing to the forefront was Zorua and Zoroark, the dark type looking like fox thing. You cannot even get a Zorua in this game unless you have an event Celebi, which you then have to go interact with one specific person on the map, and then you can get a Zorua, which is very strange to me that like, I don't know, some of the ways you would get Pokemon in these older games is just a little bit odd in that way. In Black and White too, I think they just allow you to catch one, or you can just get one more easily.
Yeah, I noticed that when I was looking at certain Pokemon, I'd be like, you have to do this in this game to get it. And then Black and White too, it's like, just go here. Like, they opened up the decks a little bit more, I think.
Yes, they did. It's funny, I did have an event Celebi in one of my old games I told you about. I was like, oh, yeah, I have this. I guess I'll go get a Zorua real quick. Just to see. And I did that mainly just because I wanted to see that whole, like,
finally do it. Yeah.
Yeah, that whole cutscene or that interaction play out, which is kind of unique. So yeah, I think, generally speaking though, like I said, to kind of bring this full circle, there are a ton of Pokemon in this dex that I just love. And you and I were talking beforehand, and like, moving forward into Black and White too. Like, I'm very excited to play these games again because there are so many Pokemon that I feel like I have not used still in this dex. Like, we have now, I have now played, I think I've only played these games. I played White and White 2 back when they came out. I've now played Black for the show here. And then I'll be playing Black 2. I still feel like there's like so many Pokemon I have not used in this dex that I want to still use. Like, because you know how I am. I like to try to mix up the Pokemon that I'm using. I don't like to use the same ones every time. Like, I have ones that I prefer and that I like the most. But I try not to recycle and reuse the same ones. I've largely mixed up my teams in all 3 or going on 4 playthroughs of this game that we've done. And I still feel like I have not used everything that I'm like interested in building a team around. And so that excites me. And that's something that I think gives this game much more longevity in a sense. And again, it's kind of weird too, because obviously there are like 4 or 5 gens after this, and all of these Pokemon have been folded into those dexes as well. I know. So in that sense, you probably don't find that half as unique.
Yeah,
but
I think there's
knowing
a lot of cool looking Pokemon. There's also some dumb looking Pokemon in this game too.
Don't bash the ice cream cones.
I'm not talking about ice cream cones or gears. I'm talking about like Vulture with an egg diaper on.
I kind of like the Vulture with the egg diaper.
I think it's so stupid looking, just the dummy. There are really cool legendaries in this game, and I think not just the main ones, but all of the kind of the ones surrounding it and the ones that revolve around the map or the event Pokemon that would eventually come out of this. I think the legendaries in this game are pretty dope, and it's a shame that we don't, in our battle rules, we don't use legendaries because there's some really cool ones.
Which ones do you like specifically?
I like the 3 Tornadus, Thunderous, Landorus.
Oh, okay,
I think those are kind of cool. I think Kyurem, the ice dragon one, is pretty cool.
Or something, yeah.
Yeah, and Genesect, bug with laser cannon, that's pretty dope. I think, those look cool. So I think the late Pokemon in this dex are neat. Braviary, I know from Arceus, because Braviary is the Pokemon you get to fly around, so like there's a whole quest with there.
Braviary was one of the first Pokemon I used when I initially played this game back in the day. That was my flying type of choice that I really liked.
Yeah, I like the buffalo thing with rings on its horns. That's neat.
I like Bisharp a lot.
This is where Golurk came from. I used Golurk in, I think, Sword and Shield, so it's cool to see the origin of these, and I like a lot of this. Like, I like the late decks. It's just kind of the early stuff.
Chandelure. Yeah, that was another big one. Chandelure. I like
the mummy-looking thing.
The sarcophagus.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, that's a really cool one. I even like some of like the more common ones, like Deerling and Sawsbuck. Like, it's cool that there's a type that is specific to certain seasons and its form change depending on the season and stuff like that. And even some of the ones that I know people hate on, they're like, oh, this is a dumb design, like Garbodor, it's a pile of trash. Vanillux, it's ice cream cones. Klinkling, it's just gears. Like, I've come full circle to like, especially seeing where they go in some of the
chandelier.
Yes,
Jellicent is a jellyfish.
Seeing where they go in some of the later dexes as well has made me come back and like appreciate these as well. And the thing I'll say too is I think these games, dude, I miss this look of Pokemon. Like, these games look so good. The sprites look so good. They are animated.
Yes, it is the best looking game we've played.
It is by far the best looking game that we have played. The moves all look really cool too. Like, I wish Pokemon still looked like this. Obviously we're in a 3D era, but like the transition to 3D, I mean, this has been a well-documented complaint that so many people in the community have had for over a decade now. But like, in the midst of the transition, we have lost, I think, just all of the newer 3D Pokemon just do not have the same sort of vibe and feel and look that a lot of these older ones do in this art style. And I miss it so much. A lot of the newer Pokemon look washed out. I think, especially when you compare them to what they looked like in these previous games. Like, the colors on these pop so well. The art is so good. Like, I miss it. I wish we could go back to this. But
if you go on a site like Cerebi and you click on a Pokemon and then just click through the gens that it's in, you can see the 3D models and then go back to these sprites. And it's to me, it's no contest. The sprites beat these 3D models all the way. It's just something was lost. And it's
they even have like
shame.
more personality in these sprites too. Like they just look so much more well defined. And again, adding the animations to them now rather than them just being static images during the fight sequences, they have all kind of got little like bouncing maneuvers or whatever. And some of them are more unique. Like I think of like what is the fighting type? Timber, who's got the 2x4 in his hands. He's like flipping it in his hands or whatever as he's standing there. Like I think that's cool. There's a lot of personality, and yes, these sprites are so good. And I'm looking through the Pokédex here too again, just to call out some other things here. Like I think Scolipede is like a really cool bug poison type. Also, the cops are coming for me or whatever. I don't know if
it's for your Poké takes.
It is for my Poké takes. Officer Jenny's coming for me. Is that her name? What is the nurse's name? It's Officer Jenny and nurse, is it Eve?
It is Officer Jenny and then nurse
it's not
Joy.
Eve.
Is it Joy?
Nurse Joy. Yeah, why did I say Eve? Anyway, yeah. This Pokédex, good one. Definitely one of the best. And I like we're talking about how pretty the sprites look and stuff. I'm imagining, I don't have to imagine because I've seen these Pokemon all show up in the later games. And just thinking about like a remake for these games, which is probably what we're going to get next. Like, I'm like, oh, it won't look half as good, which is so funny because it's over a decade after this. And you go back and play these DS games and we're frothing at the mouth about how good these Pokemon look for the time. Anyway, yeah, lots of great Pokemon in this dex. I love it overall. Max, let's talk about the story though, because this is something that we've not touched on, and I know this is something you have mentioned that you've heard about quite a bit about beforehand. Something we talked about before, how this game is very philosophical in some ways. I think the story is broadly, like I said up front at the top of the show, it's very similar to all the other ones, just in the structure of, there's a legendary Pokemon, there's a evil team, there's the gyms in the Elite Four and become the champion and all that stuff. But at the same time, there is some stark differences. Like, again, like Team Plasma, they end up kind of having the same goals as some of the other teams by the end of the game. But like the way that you get there by proxy of N and his story arc, and just, I will say, even like the structure of Team Plasma, I think is greatly different, with, N being their chosen hero or leader or whatever, but then you've got Getsus kind of as the puppet master, and then you've got all these 7 sages that are running around, and like the structure of the group is far different, which I really appreciate and I think is again unique within the larger Pokemon series here. And then their ambitions are a little bit more mysterious, and you never really get the sense that they're outright evil until sort of later, like, because the rhetoric they're spewing is not horrible. They're like, we must free Pokemon. Everybody release your Pokemon. We have been basically enslaving Pokemon. Everybody, you should release them and let them roam free. And
yes.
So there is a... Go ahead.
They are stealing Pokemon from people. It's a very
absolutely.
Hard Gold, Soul Silver, and
yes, at the end of the day, they're still like
is always slipping up. Like, my plan. I mean, Team Plasma's plan. So that's they're evil in that cartoony way.
Yes, they are, but they're not. They're not so like cartoonishly evil where I think of the past games where it's we're Team Rocket and we run around and steal Pokemon, or we're Team Magma. And we wanna just get rid of all the water, land only. Let's revive the Pokemon Groudon and just eliminate all the water. It's like, what? Like, those are like cartoonishly evil. Like these Team Plasma is trying to be a little bit more savvy and again, much different vibe, not only combined with their ambitions, but just the structure of the organization. I mentioned all the sages and N's involvement and how they've raised N. But then their look, this like medieval style look that they have to themselves, which is like even the opening cutscene of this game is like, this is a very different tone for a Pokemon game here with the whole sort of monarchy type thing they're going for with this. Maybe not monarchy, but sort of, I don't know.
I almost wish they feel out of place, I think, because of that, because the world around them is modern.
They do. But I also kind of like that disparity in some weird sense.
I almost wish, though, they had fully leaned into it, and maybe this is more Arceus talking, but Arceus is set in, early Sinnoh, right? Or the Hisu region, which would become a Sinnoh. And they lean into this old style. And I almost kind of wish these games were set in a medievalish time. And I think that would be an interesting idea. And if they ever did another, I assume they will do another Legends game. And if they decided to make Unova that region, I think it would be really cool to actually have this medieval knight angle to it and have these Pokemon be around and all that stuff. I think that would be a neat way to go about it. I kind of just wish they leaned more into it almost because I enjoyed it so much. It was cool that way.
I feel like they do in some sense with some of the Pokemon. Like I think of Escavalier, which is like meant to look like a knight. Even some of the other...
A lot of the bug Pokemon end up having like suits of armor.
Yes, they do. And then I think of some of the others in this dex as well. Like there's sort of like an old school or like, I don't want to say like ancient, but like even like Chandelure kind of gives like off like old timey vibes to it.
Yeah.
Haxorus to some degree as well. Yeah, you got Shelmet, which is like a suit of armor knight. Even Drudagon looks like an old ancient dragon type thing, and Bisharp kind of looks like a knight. They kind of lean into that in some sense with the Pokemon designs, but they definitely don't go full tilt with it by any means.
I hope they can lean into it more if they ever revisit Unova or in the remakes. I don't know. There's a lot of potential there. But my biggest problem with Team Plasma is the hypocrisy of them. Because they're all trainers and they all fight. And they're like, we must free Pokemon and stop hurting them. Now let's fight about it. And they fight with their Pokemon. And I kind of struggled with that. Like from just a surface level of, well, do you really believe what you're saying? N is the only one that at least voices a struggle, like he realizes that hypocrisy and at least comments on it and was like,
well, there are some others that you can run into. They are like off the beaten path Team Plasma NPCs where you can like, I think of one like in N's Castle towards the end where he's like, oh, I believe in Team Plasma's, or he's like, I'm fighting for Team Plasma and looking to release all the Pokemon, but also I've grown attached to the Pokemon I've raised. Maybe I'm not cut out for being part of this group or whatever.
That's an interesting one-off, but I really overall struggled with the whole, the ones you'd be forced to fight, they'd be like, and when I beat you, you're going to have to release your Pokemon. It's like, well, what about you? Are you going to release your Pokemon? Like, it kind of just falls apart really quick, and I get that you have to fight the villains, so
that's how you throw down in this world.
Yeah, and so I really was torn on that. I think it's a little bit interesting that the N talks about that at least before you fight him, and all this stuff. But it did kind of just fall a little bit on me, like this is hypocritical.
How do you feel about the one-lettered boy, N? First off, what a strange name.
A terrible name, quite honestly, an awful name.
Yes. But what did you think about N? Because he really is obviously the main sort of thrust in this game. Like we've talked about Getsus a little bit and the other Team Plasma stuff. But
I think N was hyped too much. I think he was overhyped.
I think he's one of the better like rivals in the series. which isn't necessarily a super high bar to clear in some ways. Like, you've got Blue or Gary, whatever, in the first games.
I almost would prefer, though, like a rival who's intentionally out in like a rival who's mean to you. Because Sharon in this game is a rival out to beat you, but he's like nice and philosophical to you while losing.
Yeah.
And N is like just this morally conflicted boy who was raised by Pokemon, abused
and
Pokemon.
And speaks in monologues, too.
Yeah. Very ye old English. It's so... I just feel like his whole arc and story and like how great he is was overhyped to me. And I've interpreted that. But you have to think, everyone's like, oh, N's the best, and these are the best stories in Pokemon. And they're really good, especially compared to a lot of the other games that we've played. But I was kind of like, eh. And by the end of it, I was just like, well, of course this is how it's going to go. Like he's, I do think it ends really well.
I was going to say, this is what
the build up to that fight, and the dragon coming in, and he heals you before the fight, and he's like, truth and ideals, and we're going to fight it out. Like the whole end of the game.
The two heroes must clash.
Yeah, it was really epic. Really grand.
So I think that when people talk about N and how much they like him and stuff, a lot of it does have to do with just how this game converges all the storylines. Like, this is the only game in this series where, more often than not, I feel like the legendary stuff is kind of tied up before you ever go to Gym 8. Same with the evil team. Like, once you finish those things, then you go to the final gym, then you go to the Elite Four, and then, ta-da, you're the champion. This is the one game where it's like, nope, let's have the evil team storyline clash with the legendary Pokemon storyline clash with the Elite Four stuff, and then all of those plot lines converge at the champion battle when N is the champion and he has a legendary Pokemon and you have to get a legendary Pokemon and fight him, and like it all kind of unites there at the end, which I think is greatly, greatly unique in the scope of the Pokemon series for sure, because there are no other games in these series that do this. And I think making your rival get the other version exclusive legendary that you don't have is also super cool, because in a lot of these other Pokemon games, like, depending on which version you're playing, like they won't. I think the only one I can really think of is, well, no, they don't even really do that in Sapphire and Ruby now that I think about it. I guess they do in Emerald, but like the two different version exclusive Pokemon never really end up clashing or crossing over. Like there are some instances where both appear in the same game. Like I think that happens in Sword and Shield. I think both of the different
you got the
dogs.
Sword and Shield brothers.
Yeah, I think they're both in the game. But like I a lot of times if you play Diamond, you're never gonna hear about Palkia or anything. Or
well,
you're
you hear
never
about it. You just never see it. Really
you never see it. Yeah, like this, I think these games are super unique in the sense that, like, cool, we're going to give you Reshiram, we're going to give your rival Zekrom then. And then you're going to have to square off with one another. And I just think the idea behind Reshiram and Zekrom is really cool, and how they've clashed with one another for a long time. And now this is just the latest instance in which they're kind of doing this under the guise of under the ownership of new trainers. Like, all those things I think are really, really cool. This game's final hours are pretty great.
Yes, I love all of it. I love how the champion story weaves into the plasma story going into the end. Climbing up, Victory Road is a mountain basically in this game. So you're working your way up Victory Road, and then you work your way up through the Elite Four, and then you don't fight the champion. You actually can't fight the champion until the post game when you beat the Elite Four again.
Well, you do fight the champion.
Well,
and is the champion.
You know what I mean?
I guess.
Like, he wasn't.
Yes,
that wasn't a specific. I'm here to be a champion. It was I'm here to rule Unova, and I have to defeat the champion. Like, N's goal wasn't to be the very best, like no one ever was. It was to rule, and so he defeated
which I kind of like. They put a different sort of spin on the champion thing in this game, which is like, that gives it like actual esteem that I think a lot of the other games don't necessarily. It's just like, oh yeah, that's the Poké League champion over there. In this game, it's like, no, I'm going to be the champion, prove I'm the strongest in the whole region, and then I will push my
ideals onto the world.
Yes, which is very cool and very super villainy in a lot of ways. And I like that they introduce Alder earlier in the game so that you kind of become familiar with him over the course of the game, to where then when you see him lose, you're like, I mean, obviously you don't really know how powerful he is because you never fight him yourself until the post game. But like you realize, you know, the other champion is out there, and then you see him lose, and then you have the fight. And like all of that stuff is really fantastic. Again, N himself, I don't know. I think I do agree with you. He's not maybe as good as some other people hyped him up, but like the way he is used within the story, like his actual arc of, you know, just being this kid and then being controlled by an evil group, and then he becomes champ. Like all that stuff, I think the broad beats are great largely.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. It's one of the better woven stories that kind of all come together with all these different arcs. I think Scarlet and Violet actually tries that a little bit. While you can independently do each of the 3 stories, by the end, when you're going to Area Zero, they've all intertwined on some level, all 3 of them, as you push down deeper and deeper. I don't think as effectively, but the end game of this is neat, and it leans into that Final Fantasy, like, this feels like a more classical JRPG story goal-ish that we're pushing here, and so I think that's fairly neat and cool to see play out.
It bucks a lot of Pokemon trends for sure. Like while keeping things very, very much the same in some sense. Like, oh, you know, I fight the Elite Four, and then I fight the champion, and then this, that, and the other. Like, there's kind of like 2 champion battles at the end because you have to fight N followed by Getsus, and then there's the credits roll. There's no, like, you know, let's log your team so that you go down in history as the champion. Like, you're not dubbed the champion or anything. You're just dubbed like the guy who saved you Nova, and then you can go back and fight Alder from there. But only once you have a much stronger team, because his team is like in the 70s.
I just looked. It's the upper 70s. So yeah, it's a real journey, and I think that is neat. And I wish that I had the time to like truly and fully experience that, but it is cool to have seen that play out. It does lend itself to making this one of the better stories in the franchise.
So I did have one question for you moving forward, which I know we usually talk about this stuff more at the end, but we've talked a lot about the story. How do you feel moving forward, knowing that there is a sequel here, and some of the initial things that have kind of been introduced here are going to get expanded upon in the next game we play for this season?
I'm curious. Jen, I have no idea, like, it's Team Plasma again, so I guess Geddes comes back in some way, I assume, or N is doing something different, but I find it difficult to believe that I will be fighting N on a regular basis, unless he's following the rival/Sharon route of I must be stronger than you, which I don't really see. So I'm curious how Team Plasma comes back and like what the evil push is there. I'm interested to see how the world evolves and changes, you know, because they're reusing the map, but maybe towns get bigger or better. There's growth, there's change. I think it's 2 years after the main story. So I'm curious, but it does feel like this game kind of wrapped itself up well from there's no cliffhanger so to speak. So I'm interested to see where they explore.
Yeah, there's maybe not like a traditional cliffhanger, but there is clearly like stuff with N, you know, where he's like kind of setting out to go on his own sort of little
journey. He like throws
here
his
at the conclusion
out and yeah,
and you see him kind of fly off on the Zekrom or Reshiram, whichever one, there at the end. So there is some stuff set up with him and like his sort of personal journey. To be honest, I don't remember anything associated with Black and White 2. So like this is just as much a thing that I am thinking of in the back of my mind as we move forward, as I'm sure you are, because I just cannot remember how that game really evolves. Because yes, I know Team Plasma is in it once again, but I don't really know how they expand upon it. So I'm looking forward to playing through these games again. Well, the last thing I want to bring up to you, well, there's two things. First off, with the gym leaders, how did you feel about the implementation of them in the larger world in this game and them being a little bit more than just, hi, I'm Joe Dude that stands in this gym and never leaves. Like, all the gym leaders in this game, I think, really kind of are pitched as being larger members of the Unova region as a whole. They all kind of show up there at the end as a big group to fight off the seven sages.
That's a cool moment, yeah.
That is a cool moment, I think, as well. I think that it is really... They do a better job with the gym leaders in this game and make them feel like they're actual integral members of society rather than just, hi, I'm a guy who stands in this building and hands out badges to people who come on through. Like, and with every new town you go to, the gym leader kind of introduces themselves beforehand. And then sometimes there's little missions you have to go do off the beaten path. I think of, like you mentioned Clay before, like his whole thing is like, oh, there's stuff going on in cold storage.
Find Team Plasma. Yeah.
Yeah. Like they which can get a little bit annoying at times, but I do feel like it makes it to where the gym leaders are more integral in these games, in the story, in the world building, than I feel like in a lot of the other games we've played, which I do appreciate and like quite a bit.
I'm looking at the gym leaders now. I think Clay and Lenora are probably the two that stand out the most from the library and the sheriff. But like, some of them I don't think their stories hit quite so hard or do so much in the game, like Burr here with his bugs, or Elsa and her electric Pokemon, although that gym was so annoying with the volt switching. Skyla has like a shorter little story. It's kind of cute, I guess.
The plane lady. Yeah.
Bryson, he doesn't do too much with his ice. And then same thing with Drayden. He kind of just shows up in one little cutscene in the town, and then you fight him at the end.
He's like the dragon authority. They're like, go talk to him about Reshiram and Zekrom. And you go to him, he's like, yeah, I don't really know, dude.
Oh, it's interesting that it's different. The 8th gym is a different leader if you play white. It's
yes,
Iris. Oh, that's cool. Same Pokemon, but different person. That's cool. So, yeah, I think some were a bit more important to the story overall than the others. I do think the first gym is very interesting, as where it is the opposite of whatever starter you pick, forcing you to go get the monkey to the right of town to beat it. I think that's a cool concept, depending on what you choose. So, like, I fought Cress because I chose Tepig. What starter did you choose?
I also chose Tepig.
Yeah, so we both fought Cress, but, if you choose Snivy, then you have to fight Chili or...
That's a really cool thing, I think.
Yeah, that's neat. But they
forces
didn't
you to go
any
get
other gimmicks in the rest of them, so...
Well, one other gimmick that they don't really use, which I feel like would have been interesting if they would have used it during a gym at some point, is the rotation battles, which are new and unique, I think, to this game. I don't think that's a thing that shows back up in any other games, unless I'm incorrect.
No, I don't recall anything else.
I feel like they should have used that at one point in one of these gyms, but they really don't. I don't know if you had any particular fondness for that battle style in a general sense. I think it's unique. I think it's fun. It's never forced on you like a ton, which I think
I only did it twice.
Okay.
And it's interesting strategically. You're thinking, okay, this Pokemon's strong against that one over there, but if I rotate now, are they going to rotate out to be defensive against that? So there is some like strategic thinking of how can I whittle them down and then just hit them with what they're weak against.
Yes.
But I feel like it made the battles feel slower, and this is by far the fastest battle system that we've played with so far. And I didn't care for being slowed down in that way. I would much rather have like just had a triple battle where all three of them are out at the same time.
Yeah.
Or a double battle or something like that. It's a neat concept, but I don't think I would want to have done a ton of them. And I'm glad
I said, I think one gym leader would have been fine. If they would have just done it as a one-off.
Good push of idea, yeah. and would have leaned into a more unique gym battle like they tried with the first one.
Yes, I agree with you. I think it's fine for what it is, but I don't believe it's necessarily anything that I'm like dying to see pushed to the forefront of these games by any means. Last thing I want to ask you as far as like story and characters go, did you have any particular fondness for Bianca or Sharon? Because you get two rivals in these games, and I know you talked about how you're fighting rivals way too much between those two, and then N on top of that, who's kind of your real sort of rival throughout the game. There's 3 rivals this time around. What did you think about the other 2?
I like Bianca's story, like the concept of I'm leaving home and figuring out what I want to do with my life. Sharon, I think, is far too serious. He's like, my purpose in life is to become stronger, and if I don't have that, I have no reason to live. I think he's way too melodramatic.
I do like how Alder comes in and kind of recontextualizes why he feels that way and why he wants that, though. Like, okay, cool, let's say you do become champion, then what? Like,
yeah,
what are you gonna do from that point?
His arc is cool. I just think his delivery and like writing as a character is melodramatic,
heavy-handed.
Obnoxious. Yeah, it's a bit heavy.
Yes,
but I did have a major problem with, especially basically the first, I don't know, up to 6 gyms. Basically, kind of right before the plasma stuff really gets cooking with the dragons and the stones and stuff. Basically, every time you leave town, you'll fight at least 1 or 2 of these people. As soon as you leave town, and sometimes right before you get to a town, you are just constantly crossing invisible lines, triggering events. Pokemon trainers are showing up and going, well, I have the badge and you have the badge, so now we must fight to see who's stronger. Oh, why am I so weak? Oh, I can't believe that you 2 just fought. Let me fight you so I can figure out what I want to do with my life. And it's just like over and 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 over. And it makes the game flow choppy. It is, sometimes they don't even give you an opportunity to heal between them or heal you for the fight. It's too much. 3 rivals is too much. And I wrote down I'm going to have an aneurysm if there's one more just let's battle moment. It's obnoxious. And besides that, I don't really care for them. They were more annoying, I think, than helpful to my journey.
I do think that they have far better arcs than a lot of the other Pokemon rivals that we have seen. Again, I think back to most recently, X and Y with all the different. I want my Pokemon to know how to dance and stuff like that. It's like, what are we doing here? Like, they have much better arcs than some of the latest rivals in the series that I think we've seen. But yeah, they don't like. To be honest, like coming into these games, I didn't really remember anything about Bianca or Sharon beforehand. So I think that kind of says a lot right there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like I said, moving forward, it's curious. It's interesting because a lot of the times these discussions are one-offs, but I'm curious to see how we come back to some of these points when it comes to the story and the characters. And
I'm more interested in where Bianca is in Black and White too than Sharon. Or Sharon, or however you say it. Because she actually was like trying to figure things out and like what she wanted to do with her life. And Sharon was just like, I want to be stronger. So I think Bianca has the more interesting arc. I don't think she really resolves it by the end of this game, which makes me more interested in what she's up to in the sequels.
Yeah. We've talked a lot naturally, I think, about a lot of the different gameplay elements in these games, rotation battles and things like that. The battling speed, which is greatly increased, which I appreciate and like quite a lot. I mentioned this kind of offhand. I wanted to ask you like just about HMs in particular and how you feel about how they're implemented this time around. Did you like that you don't really have to ever give your Pokemon HMs unless you are absolutely trying to explore more or something? And I don't know, I want to mention this too. I don't know if you've looked this up, but the post game gives you like 3 or 4 more HMs. Like Waterfall, I think is in the game. Dive, I think is also in the game.
Okay. I didn't look those up, but
yes.
It's great that they're not necessary. Like a habit I've picked up is looking up before Victory Road, like what HMs do I need to get through Victory Road? And this time I'm like, you don't need any of them. Strength and Surf will make it a little easier. Like you can take shortcuts and make shortcuts, but you don't need them. I was like, this is what I'm here for, because we're still in the era of you have to go to the move deleter to forget an HM. And if that wasn't the case, if I could just swap it out with the TM that I was replacing before, like then that's not really a rub. It's just annoying. So I'm glad that HMs basically aren't necessary. This is we're one step closer to just being able to fly, dive, and surf whenever and wherever and however. And that's great. Actually, X and Y feels like a regression in some ways.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, in some ways, like going to X and Y after
they were close
this.
to the right version of this.
Yes. Like, I honestly, I forgot that they dropped a lot of the HM requirements in this game. So, like, even when I got to Victory Road and stuff too, I'm like, at what point is this game going to make me learn strength to advance here? And the answer was never, which I loved.
Yeah,
because
that's great.
It allows you to do what you want with have more control over your Pokemon's move sets and stuff like that. And not only that, but like all the TMs not being single use. I think this is the first game in the series where that's not a thing. Obviously, that's become more common sense. It's hard. Again, these things are hard to remember because we've played the series and so out of order. So it's hard to know.
At a certain point.
It all blends it at a certain point, yes. But there were a lot of like quality of life improvements with Black and White that I feel like are worth calling out and pointing to, because they finally addressed so many of these things that fans had complained about at the time. Was there anything else like gameplay wise that really stuck out to you? Again, we kind of mentioned as well, the other big thing to me is just like the sprites having little animations and stuff like that. I think is cool when it comes to the battles. Other than that, there's nothing else that really jumps to mind. I don't know. Some of I guess the musicals is one note you have down here. Something else kind of off the beaten path.
I put that down because I didn't do a single one of them. I'm glad they don't force you to do it. But I think
they force you to kind of become aware that it's in the game.
Yes,
you
but they
have
don't
to very
make
briefly
you do it.
They expose you to it, but they don't force you to do it. Yes, which is I like that too.
I think this is another problem with being so removed from its launch, though, where there are just mechanics and ideas that are not like you're not gonna do it right with these days. I think of the Sea Gear a lot. They probably were doing a lot of ideas with the Pokewalker and infrared and
yes, those are actually really big things. Now that you mention it,
but now there's no I kept that stuff off because I'm not playing, like no one else is playing, and I'm not walking around and connecting to things and people. I'm not tracking my steps. All this stuff is just lost mechanics to time because either just the community is not here for this game. It keeps moving on and on. So I think, musicals is just the gimmick of this game. And I didn't touch it at all. It sounds pretty silly, but so were beauty pageants in Diamond and Pearl. So,
well, as far as the Sea Gear stuff goes, like they did finally kind of make it far, far easier with this game. I can't remember what Heart Gold and Soul Silver does, because I think they have their infrared stuff too.
Yes,
but I know with
connect with the Pokewalker.
Yes, that's right. Yes, I know with these games though, like via the Sea Gear, they make it far easier to battle and far easier to trade than ever before. You can still go to Poke Centers and do stuff kind of in the conventional method, but they really just, because I traded between my games a couple times, and all you have to do is slap the infrared thing on the Sea Gear section, and it's like, okay, we're going to look for another connection here, and then you find it, and then you're immediately launched into trading, which I think is great. It's so much more streamlined. Again, more quality of life features in these games, things that became much more common later on in the series. I just think a lot of the things that fans wanted were really present in this game with all of these features that we've mentioned in the past few moments, combined with the fully new Pokédex. These games were really big steps forward, I think, for the series in a lot of ways, and took some important strides and kind of determined where the series would go moving forward. Which, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
in some ways, I feel like they've run back some things from this era that I wish would kind of make a comeback. But, you know, Pokemon's also in a decent enough place now. We've talked about the post game, and we neither of us really did that. I think the only other thing, unless I'm wrong, the big thing we haven't talked about yet is the music. And I think this is absolutely one of the best Pokemon soundtracks, like by far. This is up there to me with the original, I have a soft spot for Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald for the Hoenn era, but I think this is like maybe like top 3 favorite Pokemon soundtrack for me. There are so many songs in this that I like heard as well that I was shocked that were in this game that I could not remember were part of this game. Some of that is just because I listen to random, like Nintendo music mixes on YouTube or whatever while I'm working, and so I'll hear some of these songs. I'm like, oh, that's a good track, and then I play through this game. I'm like, oh, dang, that came from Pokemon Black and White. I totally forgot about that. I think this soundtrack overall has a lot of great mellow tunes. I think it has some groovier songs too, like what was the one you sent me? Was it Drift Veil, which is the one that
you're walking into Drift Veil, yeah.
You're walking into Drift Veil. There's a lot of like moody songs combined with genuine bops. I know you hate the rival battle theme because you feel like it's too up-tempo. That's not my favorite either.
It's too bouncy and jubilant. Like it makes them feel like clowns. Especially, I think, Bianca up front. Like, it almost makes it feel like a joke. And that's the first battle music you hear in the game. And I was like, oh, no, this is not a good sign. The regular trainer battle is a much better theme. The Plasma Grunt battle theme is a banger. One of the better team rival themes in the whole series. I love the Team Plasma theme.
I love N's. N's battle theme, I think, is one of the best. I don't know how you feel about it, especially the final version of it when it gets in like the church organ and that stuff. The final version is going hard.
The final version's really good, but the rest, it's good, but I wasn't in love with it. Like there are other, I think, rival or final fight themes that are better. I think of Cynthia, but there's that initial bias there. I think a lot of the Scarlet and Violet stuff that you get to do with some of the final fights in that game. I
think the Elite Four battle scene or fights in this game, I think, or fight songs are also really good in this game. Like, I like pretty much. Most of the soundtrack, I think, is really phenomenal. I do agree there are some some negative. No soundtrack is great across the board. I think that's what I told you before when we were talking about this, because we did talk about this a little bit before we began recording, and I don't think any of the Pokemon soundtracks are necessarily perfect, but this one is higher up on my personal list for sure. Like they popped off with this one.
I wrote down the Celestial Tower. I like that song a lot. That was really good.
Yes.
But I think this game commits, I think, a really big musical sin. And that is that Geddes has a absolutely lame battle theme. I think it actually kills the mood of that whole build-up. Like, we're talking about how great this final build-up is. You climb the castle, you battle N with these dragons. Geddes comes in and reveals that, haha, I am the puppet master. And then his music is just like, bleh. It was not the epic final battle that I was hoping to hear.
Yes.
And I think some Pokemon fans are crazy because I finally read some comments on like the YouTube section now because I at least had context. And one person wrote, "This is literally the one-winged angel of Pokemon. Geddes is literally the embodiment of fear, has a theme song that involves chanting his name, a missing body part, and he's the Pokemon equivalent of Sephiroth." And I was like, I don't know what you're on, dude, but this was a pretty lame song.
Yeah, it's very percussion heavy, a lot of booming drums and stuff like that, but there's no real...
Slow. It's like not this up-tempo battle at all. I didn't feel any sort of excitement. I didn't feel the dread or fear that people are talking about. I
do
think
like the
this was a big
chanting.
miss.
I do like the chanting with the like the choir or whatever, the evil sounding choir, like that's cool. But
Sure.
largely, yes, I do agree with you. There's no real sort of. There needs to be all good Pokemon fight themes. I feel like have like an up tempo nature to them, and there's like a sort of hype behind it, and that's really not present with that. So yes, in that sense, that is kind of disappointing since it's the final fight of the game. The one last thing I will say, again, this is kind of runs in parallel to a lot of the other things we've been talking about with this game, especially when it comes to the art and stuff. But I miss just these, like, again, with the jump to the 3DS, the sound quality changes, and I'm not saying future Pokemon soundtracks have been bad by any means, but this kind of like these sort of more chiptune era of Pokemon games here. And again, it started to kind of change from here on out once we got to the 3DS and onward. And I miss kind of the almost like crunchiness to some of these songs from this era. I don't know. A lot of this is just very much, nostalgia. And I realize we're not going to stay in this time period forever because technology will change and things will advance and move forward. But there is like a certain like comfort and appreciation that I do have coming back to these games and hearing these old style soundtracks like what we used to have on the DS and further back, with the Game Boy when we played Fire Red and Leaf Green. I miss that stuff, but a lot of that's obviously just influenced and shaped by the fact that this is how we grew up. But there were more limitations back then, and I always appreciated and enjoyed seeing what developers and composers did within those hardware limitations back in the day. I think it prompted more creativity at times compared to some of what we see nowadays.
They pushed the DS hard and it paid off. So
they absolutely did. We talked about this before, just moving forward into Black and White 2. It'll be interesting to see our discussion with those games because obviously we've done sequel episodes before in past seasons about different series that we've covered. But this will be the first time we've ever done it in the context of Pokemon. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing what our discussion looks like in the next episode, and maybe we won't have as much to say, but maybe we'll have a ton more to say. So I'm excited about that. Until then, though, Max, as always, final question: what do you think both of these games, Black and White, what do you think their legacy is?
It's the end of the DS era, and it's one of the better stories in Pokemon. I think those are the two things that kind of really have stuck with this game throughout the decade. That's what people talk about, I think, the most. And I can see that now, and I appreciate it in a way that I couldn't before. So, and the other thing is they have a sequel. And I think that'll be more relevant when we talk about Black and White 2 specifically. But there's more to this generation than we thought previously. Basically up until Black and White 2 were announced, the concept of a sequel was not really a thing for Pokemon. It was always there's a third game, that kind of refines everything and does more. And this was like, no, we're making a sequel. And we really haven't gotten that necessarily until
We've never really had it again in general. I mean, the Ultra games, sort of.
Ultra, Sun and Moon aren't sequels. They're necessarily, I guess that's the closest, though.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's an interesting way. And also, these are the last 2D games.
Yes.
And 2D in the battling, I mean, the map is, overhead, 2D, 3D, whatever.
X and Y doesn't really make a ton of strides in terms of, like, the maneuvering around its world, getting around its world. It's in 3D in quotes, but it's still largely, isometric viewpoint moving around and stuff like that. So quite similar in that regard. You said what I was going to say is like these games. I mean, the legacy currently is like these are the next games. I mean, maybe not legacy, but these games haven't been remade yet, So like I think that's a thing that people keep kind of in their heads now. But beyond that, yes, like this is a Pokemon duology here, which is quite unique, and it's why we're doing both of these games as part of our season. Like we talked at the start of the season about how Black and White and Black and White 2 were the only games that we were going to do within the same region across the whole season, just because we felt like it was important to play both of those. And then all other instances, we were going to play, the remakes or the expanded versions of the games that existed, and we were just going to choose one and go from there. So yes, the fact that these games have a sequel, I think, is a key part. And a lot of what you mentioned before, final games on DS, yes, like these are the Pokemon games that have more of a story focus or stand out as having a more memorable story, I would say. Like, again, I can't really recall a lot of the other stories from some of these other games, at least not anything other than the broad beats, but just this game has a more central story push where all the different story elements kind of converge into a single moment at the end of the game, which we talked about. I think that's huge, and they've really never done anything like that again in the series, and I just think this is definitely one of the most unique Pokemon games for a variety of different reasons. And I'm curious, again, when we come back with our final episode of the season here with the sequels, if we will still feel like there is unique stuff implemented in those games, if they are just kind of a rehash under the guise of sequels, because this was from the era where they would release expanded versions of these games with Emerald and Platinum a year or so after the standard versions release. So are we going to feel like that it is nothing more than, just expanded versions, or are we going to feel like those are wholly different games? I'm looking forward to our discussion next time around to close out the season with those games.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it. I'll probably actually start the game here in the next day or so. So I'm eager to play that, and we probably will be playing together.
I got to offload all of the shiny Pokemon from the version of Black 2 that I bought at a local shop, because it was somebody's old copy that had 350 hours logged on it, and it has all kinds of legendary and shiny Pokemon that seem to have been obtained. They seem to have been obtained legitimately. Like if I could tell it was just like a hacked or like cheated version of the game where they got all this stuff, I wouldn't really care. But the fact that I'm pretty sure this has all legitimately been acquired makes me want to like salvage or save this for the sake of the person who once played this game.
Yeah.
So I'll have to do that. Lots of trading is in store in my future here, but after that's done, then we'll jump into Black 2.
Godspeed, sir. But with that, I think that wraps it up for our discussion on Pokemon Black. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to check out more, you can go over to chapterselect.com. You could check out Super Chapter Select for longer episodes, exclusive content, and all that jazz for just $2.50 a month, or $20 a year will get you that. You can go to chapterselect.com and check that out. Like Logan said, we're getting ready to wrap up season 6 here, but we've got season 7 and 8 down in the sites with Metroid Prime and Castlevania. So there's lots and lots going on forward here with Chapter Select. So we hope that you'll join us along the way. You can follow the show online at Chapter Select, and you can find Logan over at comicbook.com. Follow him on Twitter at moreman12. You can find my writing over at maxfrequency.net, and I'm on Twitter as maxroberts143, but I just post links to what I've written. So maxfrequency.net is the best place to go for that stuff. But until next time, thank you all so much for listening, and adios. Chapter Select is a Max Frequency production. Chapter Select is supported by you. You can gain access to longer episodes and bonus content by going to chapterselect.com/join. This episode was researched, produced, and edited by me, Max Roberts. Season 6 is hosted by Logan Moore and myself. Season 6 is all about Pokemon. For more on the season, go to chapterselect.com/season 6. You can follow the show at Chapter Select and check out previous seasons at chapterselect.com.